Hi, Dog Mums. We're back for another episode, and this week we're speaking with Sarah Rutten from the Canine Perspective. She is a dog trainer and behaviouralist, and we're going to be having a little bit of a chat today about anxiety in dogs and how that can show itself through reactive behaviour.
Thanks, Sherry. Great to be here.
Great to have you. So, do you want to start us off by talking a little bit about how you got into the pet industry and how it is you came to be doing what you're doing?
Sure. Well, I have loved dogs, I think, ever since I was born. I was that kid, at family barbecues who'd be out the back hanging out with dogs. So
Mm-hmm.
I've always been really
Yeah.
fascinated. You too, you get what I mean. I've always
Mm.
been really fascinated by behavior of all animals, humans included. So behavior has always been a fascination of mine. I've always loved dog behavior in particular. And I just decided one day that it was something that I really wanted to do for a living. So 21 years ago, I embarked on a profession that I absolutely adore. Unfortunately, dog training and behavior is not a regulated industry anywhere in the world. So you don't actually have to have qualifications to be a dog trainer or a behaviorist. Any person can actually call themselves a dog or animal behaviorist. So, but I'm a bit of a nerd, and I decided that if I was going to do something, I wanted to do it properly. I wanted to do it well. So I've done about 4 or 5 years of study, and yes, have written a book. Which was launched in August of last year, called The Canine Perspective: Using Force-Free Methods to Unleash Your Dog's Potential. And have been absolutely loving my journey working alongside guardians and their beautiful furry four-legged family members.
Excellent. So, what was it that got you initially to choose training as opposed to other pet professions out there? Was it experience that you'd had with a dog at home or just that general fascination with working out what makes them tick?
I think it's just the general fascination. I was really fascinated by behavior in general. I found that I had a very I don't know whether it's unique ability to identify patterns in behavior. It was something that came very naturally to me. And I loved problem solving. So realized that I was quite good at communicating with the human element as well. And I just found it really, really rewarding to find out what was going on for the dog and then put together a plan, and then finding that that actually helped the dog and the humans. And it just really loved it. So it was, I suppose, I don't know whether I fell into it or it was just something that kind of naturally evolved. But like I said, it's been 21 years of absolutely adoring what I do.
Excellent. Now, we were talking previously off camera about 2020 and the pandemic,
Mhm.
and what that's meant for pet parents and dogs alike. Do you want to
Mhm.
walk us through a little bit about what sort of issues you've seen coming through during and since that period?
Yeah, so 2020 was, I mean, it was really big for all of us humans, but it was also pretty big for our dogs. We've seen a lot of changes as a result of what has happened in the world in general, but also what's happened in our local area as a result. We now call those dogs who were born around the time of 2020 COVID dogs. And COVID dogs are those dogs who, like us, didn't get the opportunity to get out and socialize with the world. They didn't get the opportunity to socialize with other dogs, with humans, with men, with trucks, with buses, with children, with skateboards. They didn't get the opportunity to see the world, which is what the world was like before 2020 and what is it's now come back to. And so a lot of these dogs, they either have got real issues, some of them real issues with anxiety and reactivity. There's a lot, though, that also have issues with separation anxiety, because a lot of people were then stuck at home, weren't able to go on holidays. Many people decided to get a dog, working from home, schooling from home. And then when the world went back to normal, in inverted commas, I'm not quite sure what normal is these days, but when the world went back to normal, a lot of these dogs then really struggled. So we've got these dogs who are now around 5 years of age, 4, 5, 6 years of age, who are really struggling with life in general, whether it's life with regards to separation anxiety and being separated from their humans, or just simply being way more anxious in the world around them because they weren't socialized during that really crucial socialization period as puppies.
Absolutely. I can speak from experience on that one. I had a litter of pups that were born literally days before the first big Melbourne lockdown. And that entire litter, or a number of them anyway, have had the sorts of issues that you're talking about, because they couldn't socialise during that critical period when they were young with other dogs. Some of them have become reactive, or in the case of my pup who I kept, just very, very shy. It takes her a number of meetings to feel confident. And that's with new dogs, with new people, with new situations, period. And it's not even just that. I mean, what I think a lot of people either don't realise or maybe forget, if they haven't had a puppy for a long time, is it's not just socialising them with other dogs and learning how to dog. It's getting them used to people. It's getting them used to children. It's getting them used to all the sights, smells and sounds that exist in the world. And that just wasn't possible for a lot of that period of time.
Yeah.
You certainly can make improvements later on, but it's certainly, I've found anyway, a little bit harder when they're older, because they're grown, they're set in their ways, it can be a little bit more challenging just to sort of build that confidence and, get them to a point where they feel safe enough to cope and they're not reacting in a way that's potentially going to cause issues.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the thing that's important to recognize here is that there's a reason why there's a crucial socialization period in puppyhood. And, that has to do with brain development. It has to do with nervous system development. It has to do with bounce back. It has to do with resilience. And so when these puppies don't get the opportunity to be exposed in the right way, so it's not about just throwing them in the deep end and going, let's just get you used to the human world. It's about doing it in the right way. That particular time in their life, they're primed for that to be the most effective at that time. So yes, you can still do it when they're older, but their nervous system, they're primed at that particular time. So attempting to do it later on in life is difficult because they didn't have that happen at the appropriate time.
That's exactly right. And that's created a new set of challenges, and a little bit more work that I need to do with my now 5-year-old. In that, I mean, it wasn't that she wasn't exposed to other dogs and puppies, but it was dogs and puppies that she lived with, which really isn't the same sort of thing. It was getting her out and about, meeting them in different environments. But the other thing I've found too is even just car rides to different places, new parks, going into a pet shop, all of those things we couldn't do. I'm actively trying to do those things now so that she feels more confident, but it really takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, in terms of reactivity, I guess some of the most common things that I hear, certainly from a couple of Hattie's siblings, was things like, for example, taking them for a walk to the park or down the street, and just the level of reactivity when they would see either a human they didn't know or a dog they didn't know. And there's a wide range of behaviours there, all of which and more I'm sure you've come across. Do you want to talk us through some of the most common things that clients present with?
Yeah. So reactivity, just to give a bit of a definition of what reactivity is the behaviors that we see. It's the barking, it's the lunging, it's the growling, it's the baring of teeth, it's the behavior that looks really aggressive, and often it's mistaken for aggression. But in actual fact, reactivity it often comes from a place of fear and anxiety. So it often comes from a place where they're so uncomfortable, and the the nervous system is in fight or flight. And so often we see this more on lead, because when a dog is on lead, they have they have the inability to flee, so their only other option is to fight. So we often see a lot more on lead reactivity. We see these types of behaviors quite commonly with these dogs.
So can you give me some examples of some of these behaviours? What are some of the worst cases that you've seen?
Often when it comes to reactivity, the barking, the lunging, the growling, and
Mm,
particularly, look, it's different when people see small dogs doing it. They kind of go, "Oh, that's kind of funny." When big dogs are doing it, they
yeah,
then go, "Oh, okay, that's aggression, and that's really scary." And in actual fact,
yeah, they get
it does.
very frightened.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter if the dog is big or small, they're both struggling with anxiety potentially. That display of what looks like aggression is probably the most common when we're talking about reactivity. And I think,
Mm,
sometimes the way that some trainers will respond to that, or and it may not just be trainers, but the way that us humans have this tendency to respond to it is we need to shut that behavior down. We need to, correct that behavior. We need to put a choke chain or a check chain or a prong collar or a shock collar or something on the dog in order to stop that behavior from happening. And the problem with that is that that's not actually getting to the underlying cause of the behavior. If the underlying cause is anxiety, then what happens is the dog learns that as that scary thing comes closer, something really bad happens to me. I get, this awful feeling around my throat, whether it's from a shock collar or a correction. And so they then start to pair together the scary thing approaching with even more pain. And so while for
mm,
some dogs we might see a suppression of behavior, what's not happening is we're not changing the feeling underneath. We're not changing the fact that there's anxiety and potentially fear underneath. And that reactivity is just an expression of feeling. And so if we look at reactivity as a way of communicating, and that the dog is attempting to communicate with us that they're not okay, then we as guardians can do our best to support them and to teach them, firstly, that you're safe, to help teach their nervous system that it's safe, and then to actually start to pair good things together with the scary thing that's approaching, so that there are ways and means of being able to work with this without actually just shutting down the expression of the behavior.
So what are the steps that you take when you're assessing a dog? You've observed the behaviours. What are you doing, or what are you recommending to the owner next in terms of helping that dog?
So usually we need to firstly determine how intense the behavior is. For some dogs, it's a bit of a growl and a bit of a bark, and for some, it's an absolute lunge. We're also looking at what I call the dog's comfortable distance. At what distance do we start to see? And there's a myriad of behaviors that we start to see. Usually the lunging and the barking is right at the very end, but we actually start to see a lot of stress signals well and truly before that. So we start to see, nose licking or lip licking. We start to see panting on a day that's not hot. We see ears being flattened down. We see sometimes we actually see pulling towards the thing that's scary, which confuses a lot of people. I know sometimes for some dogs, the best form of defense is a really good offense. If I rush at you, maybe that'll make you back off. So we can sometimes get conflicting behavior from dogs too. Sometimes our dogs can go, I'm scared by that, but I also want to investigate it and I'm not really sure. Um, so usually what we do is we determine, how intense the behavior is, what the dog's comfortable distance is, and then we also determine, whether we need some kind of nervous system support. So some dogs need to have some nervous system support on board, and that can be as mild as some natural therapies. There's lots of great natural therapy products out there that can help. And sometimes we need to look at pharmacological intervention. Sometimes we do need to look at things like behavioral meds. I know that there's a lot of trainers out there who are very anti behavioral meds. I think that for some dogs, they really need them in order to be able to get their nervous system to be calm enough to be able to do the work. And it's not a matter of, let's just chuck them on meds and then they'll be fine. It's a matter of, it's a bit like humans, right? If you're struggling with anxiety, putting yourself on meds or getting your doctor to put you on meds is not the answer. You also need to go and do the therapy work. You also need to learn how to be okay, functioning in the world. So the idea of behavioral meds is that it's ideally short term so that the nervous system can settle enough to be able to do the work. And I actually do have a very dear client whose dog was put on behavioral meds, struggled with reactivity and anxiety, and we were able to work with the dog as a team. We were able to work with the dog, and she was able to bring her dog off meds, and she was able to go on holidays with the dog, and the dog is doing really well. So the aim is to actually start to teach the dog you can actually be calm in these situations, but we have to do it in a way that at the dog's pace and in a way that the dog is comfortable. Throwing them in the deep end and forcing them to be okay with certain situations is not the way to do it. It has to be done in a systematic way. There's something which is called systematic desensitization and counter conditioning, which is fancy words for saying we just take it slow and we make, little increments, little changes where the dog can go, yep, I'm okay at this distance, and then, yep, I'm okay at this distance, and we have to work at the dog's pace always.
Absolutely. And it makes sense. I mean, if you think about it yourself, if you're in the middle of an emergency and you're in fight or flight or freeze, you're in the middle of it, you can't
Yep.
think straight. There's no logical thought in there. There's just a rush of adrenaline and you're feeling all these different feelings, but it's very difficult to concentrate or to really understand what someone might be saying to you. And it's the same with dogs. If they're in the middle of a full scale panic, whatever you might be trying to say to them or do with them, it's just not going to compute. Sometimes they just need to be calmed down and not sure to enough so that their brain hasn't disengaged and they can actually take on what you're trying to teach.
I think that's a really good point, Sherry, because I think what often happens is that we think the way to get them used to something is to keep putting them in the same situation that's causing them stress. And that's not the
Not
way to do
necessarily.
it.
Can make them
No.
worse.
And so sometimes we actually have to work at quite a distance. We need to not put them over threshold. We need to not push them to the point where they're reacting. And this is where this can sometimes, be such a contentious issue where some people or some trainers will recommend, just keep doing it, just keep putting them in this situation, and eventually they'll learn to be okay. And that's called flooding. And while that can
Not
be
always.
I think that puts the dog under so much stress, and it's not
Yeah.
fair. It's not fair to the dog. But also when, the point that you raised about their brain shutting down and their nervous system being in fight or flight, you can't learn when you're in fight or
No.
flight. And what we're attempting to teach the dog is we're attempting to teach them you're safe and you can actually perform other behaviors. You don't have to lunge. You don't have to tell the other dog to go away because we're not even going to get that close to begin with. And we're going to teach you a
Yeah.
different behavior. We're going to teach you that the sight of the other dog means look at whoever's holding that lead. So, but you can't do that when they're reacting and at the other end of,
No.
when they're lunging. You can't do it in that moment. You have to do
No.
it at a distance. And I think that what we tend to do as humans is we tend to want to rush the process and put our dogs in situations where they're simply not coping, and then correct them to try and stop the behavior. And again, I think we kind of miss the point in that we need to take it slow and not, they need to be what's called sub threshold to be able to work and to understand their thinking brain needs to be switched on, and so they need to be sub threshold when that happens.
And that's absolutely key. I mean, you'd find the same thing when you're talking with owners. People need to be patient. They need to realise that there's no one single solution that is going to work for every dog. Every dog and every situation is unique, and you have to be prepared to do things at the dog's pace, not yours.
Yeah. And look, I think that it's hard for guardians. There's so much information out there. There's so much information out there on YouTube, on TikTok, and even shows that are on television that show that these problems can be fixed within half an hour to an hour, and that's just
Yeah.
not realistic. That it's so unrealistic to then have this
Setting them up to
expectation that
fail.
absolutely. I mean, it's so nothing gets solved in an hour. Like,
No.
I mean, when you're talking about behavior, it takes, what is it, 3 weeks? And I think it's actually longer to change a habit. So nothing gets solved within an hour. And when you're talking about anxiety and stress, you've got to take that into account. And you're now dealing with an animal who is, we're communicating interspecies. So we're attempting to communicate with another species who is, over threshold and panicking, and you can't say to them, "Hey, you just need to calm down,"
Yeah.
and expecting that that's all gonna happen in an hour. Like, I think that that point
Yeah.
about taking it at the dog's pace and having patience is so important, so incredibly important.
Oh, well, I've learned from experience. I mean, in my training days, I worked with a lot of dogs with anxiety, a lot with fear aggression. But I mean, even in the case of my own dog, I mean, he's 9 next week. He was an emergency rehome I took on as an 8-month old, one of the worst cases of anxiety I've ever dealt with.
Mm,
I've now had him for more than 8 years, and he
mm.
still has triggers. I mean, he's 99% better than what he was, but especially when we were starting from scratch, it was baby steps, and it wasn't weeks or months, it was years.
Years. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And I think it's also important to realize that if your dog is at the point of reacting, they're over threshold, you've gone too far, you've gone too quick, you need to back off at that point. So, rather than setting the dog up to actually react, you have to realize that once they've reacted, they're no longer learning, and you need to take a
Yeah,
step back. That the idea is not to have them get to that point when you're doing this kind of work. The aim is that the successful work is where they don't react. They're not reacting. And so that has to be done in tiny increments. And I have to admit, like, it's boring to watch. It's not exciting television. It's not exciting to watch a successful desensitization and counter conditioning protocol, because literally the dog sits or lies there very, very calmly, or walks very calmly, looks at stuff, looks away, looks at their handler, gets reinforced, and it's not flashy and it's not exciting, but that it's not triggering the nervous system either, which is why it's successful. So,
mm,
it's a very, very different concept with regards to what we see on some TV shows where, you know, the dogs are well and truly over threshold, and they're being, wrangled to the ground or corrected, or, like, I can't even watch those shows anymore, to be honest. It
no, I
upsets
don't
me too,
either.
because
Yeah.
I see these dogs so far over threshold, and people, not advocating for them. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that's another issue as well, where a lot of owners get confused is reading the signs in the lead up to an event.
Mm.
A lot of people are just not clear on what what dog body language means. What should they be on the lookout for? What are the early warning signs?
Yeah, look, and sometimes it can be really subtle. So
Yeah,
things like, I have clients who, if you're giving your dogs treats, like if you're doing desensitization work and you're giving your dogs treats, so they're looking at the trigger, they're at a distance, you're marking with either a clicker or a yes or a marker word of some description, whether it's yes, good, or whatever it is that your marker word is, and all of a sudden your dog gets snappy with those treats, their arousal levels are building. Like, it's
yeah,
very subtle, but I have clients
yeah,
when we're doing desensitization work, all of a sudden they go, "Ow," like, "Oh, geez, you're a bit snappy." And I immediately know those arousal levels are building. So,
yeah,
it can be as subtle as that. It can be as subtle as all of a sudden the dog yawns, or the dog starts doing nose licks,
yeah. Trying to
or their ears are,
self-soothe.
yeah, they flatten, they've done a shake off, they're showing signs of stress. And or even things like, they're looking at the trigger okay, and then all of a sudden they stop looking at the trigger and they just look at the ground, and they,
Mhm.
starting to avoid eye contact with the thing
Yeah,
that's triggering them. So these signs are really subtle, and often us humans, we don't know what those signs are, and then we get this explosion of behavior, and and
yeah.
out of the blue the dog just got reactive, and in actual fact it's been building and
It's
was
not out
probably
of the
building.
blue at all.
No, it was probably building for the last 50 meters. So,
Yeah,
as they were approaching the other dog or the man or the kid on the skateboard or the bike or whatever it is that they're triggered by. So, what I say to people is, work at a distance. If you're doing some work with this, distance is your friend. That's what keeps the nervous system sub threshold. Work at a distance. And, it really is important to get help from somebody who does know what they're doing, somebody who uses force free methods, who understands desensitization and counter conditioning protocols, and who isn't going to put the dog over threshold, because putting the dog over threshold and giving them a correction, like I said, it might attempt to suppress the behavior, and sometimes it does, but it doesn't change the underlying problem, the
Mm,
anxiety that's causing the issue in the first place. It doesn't change that. So that's what we're aiming to change. We're trying to teach the dog that you don't have to be scared of that thing. You don't have to be anxious of that thing. And yeah, again, there are protocols and ways to do that. And often seeking the help of someone who knows how to is really helpful.
exactly. So talk to us a little bit more about the book.
So the book was a labor of love, something that I have been wanting to do for a really long time, and I had to take some time off work. I had to take about 3 or 4 years off work because I got very sick with mold illness.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so 2020 through to 2024, I was actually suffering from mold illness and then in recovery from mold illness. And while I had some time off, I had to close the doors to my business because I was too sick to work. And while I had some time off, I went, you know what? I've been wanting to do this for a very long time. I've always wanted to write a book, so why not do it? And my aim for the book, as well as, kind of culminating my 21 years of knowledge and putting it all in one place. Also, there's a lot of dog training books out there that are really dry. Some of them, I read them and I'm like, oh boy, they're so technical, or they can be really challenging to read. And I wanted to write a book that made people laugh. I wanted to write a book that made people go, you know what, this is actually kind of funny and enjoyable to read, as well as giving me some insights. So I wanted to write a book that made people laugh, that made people cry. Spoiler alert, the last chapter is you might need tissues or a glass of wine for that one. And
Oh,
also
dear.
made people go, "Oh my god, I didn't realize that's why my dog did that." Or, "Oh my goodness, I didn't realize, oh, that's normal behavior. I didn't know that." Or, "Oh, this makes so much sense. Now I understand why my dog's doing what he's doing." So from all accounts, it's ticked those boxes. So it did go number one on 11 categories on Amazon within 48
Wow.
hours of being released in August of last year.
Crazy.
So it's so exciting. Um,
Yeah.
the audiobook is coming out in August, September of this year, which is also super exciting. I found out today that there's a woman by the name of Pat Miller who is, like the guru of gurus when it comes to one of the guru of gurus when it comes to force free training. And she kindly wrote the foreword for my book. That was an honor for her to actually write the foreword. And anyone in the dog training and behavior world knows who Pat Miller is. And I found out today from one of the women doing one of her training classes. Pat has actually said that my book is part of the recommended reading list. So I was like, oh my God, I
Wow.
was so stoked by that. So, yes, it's something that has been a pretty massive achievement for me. It's something that I'm incredibly proud of. The dogs that are on the front cover, I will say, are mine, but we did lose two of them in a very
Mm,
short space of time. So we lost one, the two fawn ones on the cover. One, we lost him in late October of last year. And then we lost the other fawn girl, who was my heart dog. We lost her in early January of this year. So within 2.5 months, we went from 3 dogs to one. So in the
wow.
audio book, there will be a little tribute to them. I'll attempt to do that without crying. I'm not sure that I will be able to
Mm,
succeed. But they are, their story is scattered throughout the book as well, and they get mentioned quite a bit. So, they're immortalized within the pages. But
yeah.
yeah, for a first book, I was pretty happy with the outcome. So yeah,
As you should
it's
be.
yeah, so it was such a fun experience, and it's opened up some doors that I would never have expected. I'm appearing on a lifestyle program in America at some point this year, so
Wow.
that yeah, that's opened that door. So it's been a pretty amazing experience.
Fantastic. So for anyone who wants to check out the book, where can they go?
So they can go to my website if they would like a signed personalized copy, which is www.thecanineperspective.com.au. It's also available on Amazon in all countries. So you don't just have to be Australian. If there are any listeners who are international listeners, you can also order it online on Amazon in your specific country. And if you loved the book, feel free to leave a review. I'd love to know what you thought.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time again. Lovely chatting, and we could talk all day. We're going to have to get you back and talk about some more things, I reckon.
Yep, would love that. I'd absolutely love that.
Right?